Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's special Facebook Live event in the group. So happy that you guys could be here and so happy to have our special guest here tonight. I'm going to introduce Diana in just a minute or so, but wanted to kind of go over a few things first. Let me know when you, hi, Michaela. Let me know when you log on and if you can hear me and see me okay. So tonight's event is called How to Teach Independent Sleep with a High Need Baby. As I said, Diana is going to be talking. She's the real expert on sleep here. So she's going to be sharing tons of tips and tricks and strategies with you throughout the evening for probably at least the next hour. And she's going to be talking about a bunch of stuff really specific to high need babies. And the reason why is this. Ever since I started the Fussy Baby site and this group, the question that comes up maybe more than any other is, can high need babies actually learn to sleep? Can they learn new routines? Because they're so sensitive and intense and persistent, parents worry, maybe my baby is destined for bad sleep. Maybe we can't sleep train. Maybe we can never introduce a new routine. And Diana is kind of my go-to person for all things sleep and high need babies. So I'm very happy to have her here. Some of the things that you can look forward to this evening, she's going to talk about how to lengthen sleep cycles, both at night and I guess to extend nap time as well. Some sleep tips for newborns, younger than 4 months. I love this, how to naturally stimulate melatonin production. And also she's going to share her 3 most important sleep tips for high need babies. So before I hand the mic over to Diana, just a bit of housekeeping. As promised, for those of you who are here live tonight, I'm going to be awarding a few prizes throughout the evening. The trick is you have to be here, obviously live, and you need to let me know that you're here. So you should see a little button that says give access to StreamYard or something like that. You need to click that so that we can see your name and profile picture when you comment. So throughout the broadcast tonight, you can comment, you can ask a question, you can tell us your baby's age, tell us your biggest sleep struggle that you have, and that's going to enter you to win. So we're going to choose from those, choose randomly from your comments to award the prizes. So again, make sure you give StreamYard access, because I'm seeing a couple people that haven't, and then it just shows up as Facebook user. So then I can't give you a prize. Someone's asking, will this be available to watch later? Currently dealing with my colicky baby. Yes, definitely. It will be available on this exact post after the live. So again, make sure you comment, make sure you let us know that you're here, and I'll be awarding a few prizes throughout the evening. Once Diana's done talking, she is going to open it up to you for questions. So again, make sure that we can see your name so that she can address your questions. I think that is all. So now I'm just going to introduce Diana, and then I'm going to turn the screen over to her for a while. So Diana is the founder of Big Sky Lullaby, which is a sleep coaching consulting firm. She's been a sleep consultant for 8 years and is certified through the Family Sleep Institute. She started working with high need babies as soon as she became certified, because she actually had a high need baby herself. And that's actually how I sort of found out about Diana, because I was really interested in, sleep training and high need babies. So she works with families all around the world, and her program specializes in offering a great deal of support through the process, both day and night. So I am going to turn it over to Diana now, and I'll be keeping an eye on the comments as well. So if you have questions or having any technical issues, feel free to tag me in the comments. Okay, now let me see if I can do this.
Well, hi, everybody. I hope that everybody can see me and hear me. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be here. I love doing webinars for this group because I think that sleep is a really important piece when we have a high needs child. And it is not easy. And so I know what that is like both personally and professionally. And so I really like to work with parents in this group so that I can give all sorts of tips and tricks and strategies so that we can make the high needs piece just a little bit easier. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna kind of go through my most important tips that I give, my really important things that I want you guys to focus on. And then I'm just going to go through, what I think that you guys need to know the most and what would be the most helpful. And so, like Holly said, you'll have a chance to ask me questions later on. And then hopefully I can answer those and we can get you guys some good information tonight. So the first thing I want to start by doing, which I always start off by doing, is giving my most important pieces of information. And so that doesn't mean that all of this isn't important, but I try to focus on these 3 points at the beginning. And then as I move into the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to kind of go on and explain them even more. And we'll see how all of it kind of pertains to these 3. So number 1, when it comes to sleep training, especially for high needs children, consistency is key. So the last thing that we ever want to do is experiment. The last thing that we want to do is start a sleep training process and then stop. So once you are ready to sleep train, which we'll go over here later, you want to have a solid plan in place. So whether you work with a consultant, whether it's me or somebody else, or whether you're just going to do it on your own, you want to have an absolute solid plan in place that takes care of everything from morning wake ups to naps, short naps, bedtime, and night wakings, because you need to, agree with your partner on what that's going to be so that you guys are consistent moving forward. The worst thing that we can do is experiment, especially with a high needs child, because the more times we start and then stop, the harder it's going to be. So that's where someone like me comes into play, because I offer that support piece. When we are having a rough time, it is important for me to step in there and say, hey, this is part of the process. Sleep training is up and down. There's some regressions. There's some, sometimes we take a couple steps forward and then a couple steps back, and that's all really normal. And so we want to make sure that we understand that going into it. So I often tell parents that sleep training can be a roller coaster ride. Days 7 and 8 are not necessarily easier than days 5 and 6. We can have a lot of really good days, and then we see things start to regress. And then the worst thing that parents do is start to panic and second guess themselves and change the plan. And so that's why I say consistency is key. Have a solid plan in place before you begin. The second piece of critical advice that I'm going to give you is that there is no point in doing any of it unless you are doing all of it. So what I mean by that is a lot of parents will reach out to me and they'll say, well, I don't know if my son or my daughter can handle this. So can we just work on naps, or can we just work on night sleep? Well, your child doesn't know the difference. So they don't know that, okay, I'm supposed to put myself to sleep on my own at nap, but at night, my parents are going to feed me, rock me, or bounce me to sleep. So they can't understand the difference between that. So we want to make sure that we have all of the elements lined up and in place at the same time, and that's how we see success. So we need to make sure that the sleep environment is set up properly, and I'll go over that here in a minute. We need to make sure that our timing for day sleep is on track, because day sleep affects night sleep and vice versa. And we need to make sure that, we have a good bedtime, because that's critical. And we need to make sure that, all of those little pieces of the puzzle are in place and we're doing it all at the same time. So we don't want to experiment. And if you're here tonight and you're listening to what I'm saying, again, take all of the information in, but again, don't start testing things out and say, oh, well, that one thing that she said, that sounded pretty easy, so let's attempt that. You don't want to do any of it unless you're doing all of it. So you want to choose a day to begin. You want the changes to happen at the same time. You want it to be abrupt and kind of catch the child off guard. And then once you start, you do not stop. And that's, again, where that consistency comes in. My third piece of advice, and this is what I tell parents during consultations and seminars and webinars and all the time. This is my number one piece of advice. Your child, in order to sleep train, in order to be successful, in order to do this, your child must go from awake to asleep while in their crib. Now, that doesn't mean that they need to be alone in the room, and we'll go over, sleep training strategies here later. But that is, a critical piece of information. So a lot of parents will rock their child to sleep and then try to transition. And, of course, with our high needs babies, those transitions don't always work, but on the great chance that we have that they actually do work, your child's not going to stay asleep for very long, because once they wake up, they're going to wake up in a place that they didn't fall asleep. So that's like me and you falling asleep in our house and waking up in our neighbor's house. We're going to be startled, we're going to be upset, and we're going to be confused. And that's what happens to your child. And so they need to go from awake to asleep while in their crib. Okay. So a couple of just what I call, routine pieces of advice that I like to go through in the beginning. So let's start with the sleep environment. So the sleep environment needs to be completely free from distractions. So any mobiles that are hanging up in, above the crib, which it's really frustrating to me, because like when you buy bedding or all these sleep, things that we put on our crib, mobiles always come with it. And it's just so misleading, because what we're doing is we are putting our child to sleep, and then we're putting this really stimulating thing above them. And so we're basically saying sleep, but here be stimulated by this thing hanging above your head. So anything like that needs to be removed. Absolutely nothing that lights up, glows in the dark, plays music, none of that. And if, there are products out there, there are apps, there are machines where it's like, you get your baby to sleep through the night, get your baby to nap by playing this music or making these lights shine on the ceiling. Absolutely none of those gimmicks will work. And if they do work once or twice, you're just lucky. It is absolutely not going to be a long-term thing. We want the room as dark as possible. So later on, I'm going to go into natural melatonin production, but this is one of the biggest ways that we do that. So complete darkness. On a scale from 1 to 10, I want the room as close to a 10 as possible. So when you are in the room and you put your hand in front of your face, I want it to be hard to make out your hand. Pitch black. And for both naps and night sleep as well. So some parents will say, well, is it supposed to be like that at daytime as well? Absolutely. So if you have, and then other parents will say to me, I bought these blackout curtains, but there's light coming through on the side. Well, what we can do is we can do temporary things like take some black garbage bags and tape those up against the window. We can take a dark blanket and thumbtack that around the windowsill. I work with a really affordable company, and I'm sure there's many out there that make really affordable blackout shades that Velcro around the windowsill. And so if you're going to be in the home you're in for the foreseeable future, it's definitely a good investment. So room as dark as possible. The only light I allow in a room is the small little green light on a baby monitor. If you have one of those baby monitors that have big red LED lights in a circle all the way around it, get rid of it. You need as little light as possible. So like the tiny little green light on the baby monitor. Some people will tell me they have a humidifier in there that gives off light and all these things. And sometimes there's an option to shut the light off. So if you can, great. If you can't, what I did for my son, 8 years ago was I took a dark piece of construction paper and I taped it over any light that I couldn't shut off. So complete darkness, completely free from distractions, and then white noise. I'm sure you see that all over the internet. That is great. So we want white noise. The noise machines that have several different options on them. I'm not terribly opposed to the different options. What I am opposed to is music. So any sort of lullabies or special music that you guys are going to play is going to be really stimulating, and it's going to fluctuate. And so that's why we want that white noise. We want it on day and night. We don't want it to start and then, shut off 30 minutes later or an hour later. Try not to use, your phone, an app, or your iPad, because those are going to give off light and they might stop. So invest in a white noise machine. You will not regret it. You want it to be at medium volume, kind of halfway across the room. And so I tell parents, to put that on the noisiest wall and put the crib on the quietest wall. So what I mean by that is if the sleep environment shares a wall with, let's say, an older sibling or a kitchen or a living room where it's kind of noisy, that's where you want to put the white noise. And again, put the crib on the quietest wall. And just a multiples trick. If you do have twins or triplets, it's perfectly appropriate to have a white noise machine for each of them. And so white noise is key. So we definitely want to use that. And then as far as temperature goes, we do want it to be between 68 and 71 degrees. That's more important for our 12-month and under children, but it is an important piece of it. And then also, as far as, sleep environments, I do tell parents I like cotton material. So as far as pajamas and sleep sacks and sheets, I think that cotton material is breathable, and I think it's the best. So I don't like fleece. I don't like polyester. I don't like anything like that, because I think that it rubs up against the skin, causes friction, causes irritation, and it will wake the child up. So as far as the sleep environment goes, those would be my main elements to focus on. We also want to have a solid soothing routine. So before you put your child down for a nap and for bedtime, you want to have a routine that is the same every day and every night. This routine is what your child will associate with sleep. So it doesn't matter if mom puts them to sleep, dad, a grandparent, a babysitter. It doesn't matter when the time changes, when you travel. This routine is what your child will associate with sleep. And so it's very important to be very consistent with that, and have that both day and night. Let me just look at my little checklist here so I can make sure that I'm going over all the things that I promised. Okay, so next what I want to do, I want to give some advice about the newborn stage. So just like you guys, I am a parent of a high needs baby, and so I am on the site and I see all of the posts every day, and I see all of the the ones in the newborn stage, and when we have children that that have colic, and it's not easy. So I've been there personally, and I work with parents professionally. So I want to start by saying it's not easy, and it will pass, but some things to get us through the newborn stage is going to be helpful. Just some educating ourselves so that we understand, the habits to stay away from, the things we want to start implementing. But most importantly, we need to understand that the newborn stage is child-led. So what I mean by that is we cannot be strict in the newborn stage. The newborn stage is defined as 0 to 4 months, and that is for a child born at 40 weeks. So if your child was born at 38 weeks, it's 4.5 months. So make sure you make that adjustment and know when the newborn stage is going to end for your child. Also, just a side note, I get, families that reach out to me all the time with a 4-month-old, a 5-month-old, and they say, we worked with this sleep consultant at 2.5 months or 3 months, and they tried to sleep train and it was a disaster, and now it's even worse than it was before. You cannot sleep train a child under 4 months, or you should not sleep train a child under 4 months. It will backfire. They are not old enough, and we want to make sure that we are waiting until they're ready. So as far as the newborn stage goes, when it comes to feeding and sleeping, we want to try to separate that as much as possible. So this is going to be for our older children as well. But this is just kind of a general piece that we want to start establishing in the newborn stage. So as much as possible, try to feed your child when they wake up, as opposed to always getting them to fall asleep, at the breast or at a bottle with a bottle. Again, I understand that this is not, always feasible, especially with our newborns, but these are just things we want to try and work on. So we want to really control those wake times with a newborn. So like if we have a child that's under 2 months, we really don't want them awake longer than 45 minutes to an hour before we attempt to put them to sleep. So what I would do is after 45 minutes to an hour, I would go into the dark room, lay them down and try and do some shushing and patting, for even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if you can do it. If your child is hysterical, no need to, go through that full 10 minutes. And then just pick them up, rock them, bounce them, and feed them to sleep if absolutely necessary, and get them to take that nap. But if you can continue to practice keeping those wake periods short, you're going to attempt it at every single nap. Try putting them down and doing the shushing and patting. And like I was saying before, getting them to go from awake to asleep while laying in their crib or their bassinet. And you will be surprised that sometimes it will take. And the more and more we practice, the better chance we have at it actually working. And so, try to not resort to always feeding them to sleep, or not resort to always feeding them as soon as they wake up if it's not time. So if you have a newborn and they're taking really short naps, which is really normal, by the way, 20-minute, 30-minute naps in the newborn stage, you're not going to need to feed them every time they wake. So go by what your pediatrician has recommended, whether it's every 2 hours or every 3 hours. And sometimes you might be able to fit in 2 naps between feedings. Or if you get lucky and you get a really long nap, then, you can feed upon waking, then do playtime, then do a soothing routine, and then lay them down for their nap. And so get into that habit of trying that. As far as nighttime goes, what I tell parents is, again, go by what your pediatrician has recommended. So normally it's every 3 hours at night. And so I wouldn't wake the baby to feed them unless your doctor has told you to. So if they have told you to, then absolutely do that. But if your child is doing great on the growth chart, no need to wake them. But if they wake on their own, try to keep those feedings at every 3 hours. So what I tell parents is, if we have a breastfeeding mom, we can have mom handle the feedings, and then dad can handle the wakings in when they wake up in between those 3 hours. And give dad a chance, let them take the child out of the room. They can walk around with them. They can bounce them. They can rock them, whatever they can do to try to get the child to sleep without feeding them. And of course, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to work, right away that first night. But you'll be surprised that if you stick with it, how much progress, you can make. So those would be my main pieces of advice for the newborn stage. But again, you don't want to sleep train before 4 months. You want to get into the habit of, establishing healthy sleep and keeping away the eat sleep association as much as you can. So going into my infants, so that's 4 months and older. One of the biggest things that we do during sleep training is establishing their melatonin production. Now, you've heard of people giving their child melatonin, and often that's what a doctor will recommend, oddly enough. Pediatricians are not trained on sleep, because if there is not a medical reason that your child doesn't sleep, then sleep is not medical. That's why I don't need to be a doctor to do what I do. And so there are 2 things that they usually say is let them cry, give them melatonin. So we don't need to go that route. So what we can do is get their melatonin to increase naturally. So the best way to do that, again, is to keep their wake times controlled. So that's going to depend on how old your child is, if they were born before 40 weeks, what kind of naps you have going on, if they're overtired or not. And so we want to make sure that we control those wake times. So that and the darkness and having an early bedtime is the best way to increase melatonin. So one of the myths and wise tales I hear all the time is, keep your child up so that they'll sleep better at night, or put them to bed later so they'll sleep in the next morning. That is not true, and it is not going to work. And a lot of times, child sleep is counterintuitive for parents, because for us, that would work. If we were exhausted, we would go to bed late, we'd sleep well, we'd sleep in the next morning. It's not going to happen for children. The early bedtime lets them build up that melatonin production, and then the longer stretch of sleep lets them, continue to build that melatonin production, so that they're more likely to stay asleep and transition from one sleep cycle to the next. From 4 to 6 a.m. is the hardest time of the 24-hour period to produce melatonin. There is no need to ever take your child out of a pitch black room before 6 a.m. Unless there is an emergency and you need to evacuate your house, you should never, ever take your child out of a dark room before 6 a.m. Okay? So when it comes to natural melatonin, darkness, and controlling those wake times and early bed times, that's a great way to do that. Now, going from one sleep cycle to the next is similar to that. So during naps, we want to use what I call crib hour. So try to keep your child in the crib for 1 full hour from the time they fell asleep. Now, this means you need to establish, what sleep training strategy is going to work for you, and know that during crib hour, if they have woken up happy, just stay out of the room for the rest of crib hour. If they have woken up upset and you can handle the crying, stay out of the room for the rest of crib hour. If they have woken up crying and you cannot handle the crying, that's perfectly fine. And you're going to go into the room, use your sleep training strategy until the end of crib hour. If they fall back to sleep, great. If they don't, just get them up and move on with the day. But you will be surprised as to how effective crib hour is. If your child is only taking 20 or 30-minute naps, which is the length of one sleep cycle, which means that their body does not yet have enough melatonin to transition from one sleep cycle to the next, then you might not be able to make that full 30 minutes, and that's fine. Start with 10 minutes. See if you can keep them in there an extra 10 minutes, whether you're in the room or not. That will be really helpful. And again, if you continue to practice it, you will be surprised as to, how quickly it actually does work. So a couple of other things. So I talked about the sleep environment. One more thing about timing. Again, we want to make sure that we have naps that are appropriate for or the age of the child. So this kind of leads me into one other thing that I always like to talk about, which is the word regression. Now, if we are Googling how to get my child to sleep, why won't my child sleep, what do I do? We're going to see that word regression all over the internet. We're going to see it in books. We're going to hear our friends say it. I don't like that word because it really just, throws us off. All it means is that there's a need for change. So for example, we often hear about the 4-month sleep regression. It's not a regression. It's a need to change from what we're doing to handle a newborn to now we're in the infant stage, and we're going to address infant sleep a lot differently than newborn sleep. So it's a need for change. We often hear about the 9-month sleep regression. All that means is we should be done with 3 naps at 9 months. We should be on a solid 2-nap schedule, and then move on with that. And so don't be so worried about that word regression. I see a lot of you guys post about it and say, is this a regression? I'm so worried. It's coming up. What am I going to do? It just means that there's a need for change. And so if you think of it that way, think it's more helpful. And you can just say, okay, well, is there something we need to do differently for naps or night sleep? And how should we address this change? Holly, this is my halfway mark. Do we want to switch over to you and then we can do some prizes?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. If you guys missed the beginning of the live, I had said that we would be doing some giveaways during the event. So I'm going to give away 2 prizes now. And then I will be giving away another one later on after question time. If you still want to be entered in for that last prize, make sure you're commenting so that I know that you're here, and just choosing randomly from people who have commented. So the first prize, Diana talked about the importance of white noise, which I love. And sometimes if you're traveling or you're at grandma and grandpa's house and you don't have your white noise machine, it helps to have a portable one. So the first thing is a My Baby Sound Spa portable white noise machine. And that is going to go to Candace Buckley. So Candace, send me a private message after this, after the broadcast, and I'll make sure that gets sent to you. And then the second prize for right now is a favorite toy, actually, that is somehow high need babies love this toy. I hear this like so often from parents. It's the Baby Einstein Take Along music toy. So the winner of that is Adina Massania. I probably did not say that right. But Adina, message me after this and I'll make sure to get that to you. And I just noticed someone asking, will this be for newborn sleep as well? And yes, actually, Diana talked about that quite a bit earlier. So make sure you go back and watch from the beginning after this is over. Okay, I am now going to hand the mic or the screen back to Diana.
Thank you. Those are some great prizes. So I think that will be really helpful. So that's awesome. All right. So now what I want to focus on is how to know if you're ready to sleep train, especially for a high needs child, and what our strategy should be. So how to know if you're ready, you need to make sure that you and your partner and your family, if you have multiple people living in your house, are all on board to start the process. Because like I said before in my 3 most important points that I went over in the beginning, you absolutely have to be ready and you have to be consistent. So if you guys have some big trips coming up, or if you are just worried about sleep training your child at a certain age. I have a lot of people reach out to me and say, I've heard you're not supposed to do it before 6 months. My doctor said to wait 6 months. I sleep train children at 4 months all the time. But if you feel like you are not ready until 6 months, then wait until 6 months. If you feel like you're not ready until, they're even older and maybe more established on solids, sometimes parents prefer that, then wait till that. Don't do what your friend is doing or your sister's doing or your neighbor's doing, because a lot of times they don't have high needs children. And as we all know, if they don't have one, they don't get it. And so we want to make sure that you as a family are ready before you begin the process. And like I said before, you want to have a solid plan in place, before you begin. And so if you are a family that likes to co-sleep, or you are a family that, doesn't mind doing that, then that's up to you. But I have a lot of people that reach out to me and they tell me they're co-sleeping out of necessity or desperation. And that's not something that they want to do. And they are just, they're ready. They're, it's important for a husband and wife to have that time, together alone at night. It's important for them to have their bed back. And so if you guys are just kind of at your wit's end and you're like, that's it, we need to change this, we are ready, then that's a good sign to know that, it's time to take that next step, whether it's establishing a plan on your own or reaching out to a professional like myself and getting that started. So as far as the strategy goes, a lot of sleep consultants like myself, we get our bad rap for people thinking that we condone or only use cry it out. So I refer to that as extinction. And it's just not the case. So when I had a child that never slept more than 2 hours in a row until I was 9 months. I was out in public and a stranger came up to me and handed me a business card. And it was of a sleep consultant. And I had no idea what that was. And I, really at that point had nothing to lose. And so, I called her and we talked about it. And I said to her, my sister has a child similar to my child's age, and they're just using cry it out. And when I talk to my doctor, all my doctor says is shut the door and don't go in there until the morning. Well, these people don't really understand what it means to have a high needs child. And that's really not going to work for most of our high needs babies. So we want to just understand that even though crying is involved, it doesn't mean that you need to be separated from your child. You can be in the room, hugging your child, kissing them, stroking their back, stroking their head. If they're standing up, rubbing their back. If they're laying down, reached over that crib and doing all sorts of touch and heavy patting and anything we can do to have them, find comfort from our touch. I don't care if you're halfway in the crib with them. We can, as long as they go from awake to asleep while in the crib, which is one of my most critical points, it's okay to be in the room. And even though your child is crying, they're not hurt because you're looking at them. They're not scared because they're literally in your arms. They don't feel abandoned because you're, again, right there with them. And so a lot of people will reach out to me and we'll talk about the crying. And, what I always explain to them is that's their way of communicating. And if they could talk, they would say, Mom, Dad, I'm exhausted and I'm just trying to figure this out. It's their way of protesting. And so, try to think of it that way when it comes to the crying. And then also, when we have a high needs child or really any child that is sensitive to sleep and is up all night, they're up all night crying anyway. So with a sleep training strategy, when you have the right one and when you do it properly, there's going to be crying, but it's going to be short-lived. It's going to be, a couple of nights, a couple of days, and the crying, we put it to good use. And so what I mean by that is, there will be crying, but it doesn't mean that, again, you need to be away from your child when they're crying. And then we use the whole sleep training strategy to get to where we need to be, which is ultimately, getting them to sleep independently. So, again, you can be in the room with your child the whole time. So don't let people think that the only way to sleep train is cry it out or extinction. And you can do something in the middle, where you're going in and out and doing checks. There are a lot of different options. And so just don't think that that's the only way to do that. What I've learned by working with a lot of high needs families and a lot of not high needs families is the method that we choose often with our non-high needs families is more about the parents. So, a lot of them, people will say to me, what strategy works the best or what method works the best? What's the quickest? The answer is they all work. You have to choose one that you can stay consistent with and that works for your family and that meets your parenting style. So you can kind of compare it to maybe like a weight loss program. All of them work. You just have to choose one that works for you, that you can stick to. And so it's a lot like that with sleep training. And so for our non-high needs families, it's more about the parents and what works for them. When it comes to our high needs families, what I have found the major difference is the strategy is more about the child. So often we don't really have a choice. If let's say we wanted to use cry it out, or we wanted to do something where we're not in the room or doing checks. If our child is too sensitive and that's not going to work for them to the point where they are so distraught, it's taking more than an hour to the point where they make themselves sick, we don't really have a choice but to be in the room with them. And that's perfectly fine. I used a method where I was in the room with my son very successfully. And that is what I've learned is one of the major differences, the knowing your child and knowing what works for them, and knowing that, you most likely have to be present during at least the initial stages of sleep training. So, again, it's all part of the, coming up with a plan and putting that in place, is coming up with a sleep training strategy that you and your partner agree on and that you're both comfortable with. And so that's a big one that we need to take into consideration when it comes to sleep training. A couple of the things that I wrote down that I was going to give some advice on are just my main pieces that, I get asked a lot of questions about. And one of them is daycare or nannies. And people will say to me, well, my daycare, they're not doing what I'm doing as far as timing. They're not able to use a sleep training strategy like I am. They're not able to use crib hour. They have all these different rules. They won't change their schedule. And so my thing about daycares is we have to choose our battles. So as long as your child is having independent sleep, and so again, this is for my infants, so not my newborns. So 4 months and younger, this is going to be a little different. But for my infants, we want to make sure they are not using a pacifier. So if you are sleep training at home, pacifiers are not going to be used at all. And so, we want to make sure at the daycare they're not using a pacifier. We want to make sure that they are putting them down awake. I understand they might not be able to go through the whole soothing routine that you do at home, and that's understandable. So, maybe have them choose the song that you guys are going to sing. Or for example, with my clients, I have them say a key phrase at the end of the soothing routine. So if the daycare staff could sing the song and say the key phrase as they're laying them down, that's really helpful. And if you guys are on a 2-nap schedule, if they can still have a 2-nap schedule, even if the timing is a little bit different than what you have at home, again, as long as they are getting day sleep, we can make up for what they're not doing at night. And so, we want to, again, have that plan in place to know what we need to do at night. And so if they're not doing well with naps at daycare, we want to make up for that with an early bedtime. Don't be scared of early bedtimes. That is one of the biggest tools we can use during sleep training. So a lot of parents will say to me, like, you want me to put my child to bed at 5:30 or 6, but my husband doesn't get home in time, and then we haven't had dinner yet. And I understand that, but we also have to understand that it's not forever. This is just during the actual sleep training. So I'm not doing it to be mean, to say, parents are going to come home late from work and not see the child. We're doing it to build that melatonin. So any loss of day sleep, we make up for with night sleep. And we do not expect your child to get up any earlier the next morning. So a lot of people will say to me, well, does that mean my child's going to be up at 4 or 5 a.m.? The answer is no. We still never consider anything before 6 a.m. morning, and we never let a child sleep in past 8 a.m. So think of that morning wake up window between 6 and 8 a.m. So also when it comes to daycares, just making sure that they are separating eating from sleeping. So this is one of the biggest things that, I deal with when it comes to my clients. About 90% of people that reach out to me, their child has an eat-sleep association, because, that's the quickest way we learned, especially with our high needs children, how to get them to sleep. My son certainly had an eat-sleep association when we went through this, and breaking that makes all the difference. So your child needs to learn that there's a time to eat, there's a time to sleep, and that the two are not connected. We are not, a lot of parents will say to me, well, I'm going to starve my child. All they do is eat at night. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to flip that around. So instead of them getting all of their calories at night, we're going to now make sure they get all of their calories during the day. So you want to concentrate on feeding them right when they wake up. So if it's just, if they're too young for solids, it's just milk, whether you're nursing or there's a bottle, right when they wake up, not in their sleep environment. Okay. So we want to do something in between when they wake up and feeding them, something as simple as getting them dressed and changing their diaper, take them out of the sleep environment, go downstairs into a living room or a kitchen or wherever, a room where there's television, noise, lights, conversation, so they understand that they are now going to eat and they're not going to fall asleep. A lot of parents will say to me, well, my child's a distracted eater, and that's going to be hard for us. And I understand that. But as we get sleep under our belts, their eating is going to improve vastly. So you want to feed them when they wake up in the morning, when they wake up from each nap, and you want to feed them at the beginning of the bedtime routine. Okay. Not at the end, not in their sleep environment, not right before we put them down. Again, in a room with noise, television, lights, conversation, then give them a bath, then go through your soothing routine, and then lay them down. concentrate on the amount of ounces your pediatrician has recommended for that age and see, how, well you can do getting those in during the day. The more we practice that and the more ounces we get in during the day, the easier it's going to be for them to understand or for them to be able to have longer stretches of sleep at night. So we want to make sure that we are, not just resorting to feeding them when they wake up. So any child past 9 months. So again, this is adjusted if needed. So if your child was born a month early or 2 months early, you have to make that adjustment when it comes to sleep. Let's say they were born on time and now they're 9 months. 9 months and older, they absolutely do not need to eat in the middle of the night unless they're not doing well on the growth chart and it's instructed by the pediatrician. So what happens when they do eat in the middle of the night is their stomach is upset, and they just continue to wake up because of it. So it would be like me and you, instead of having dinner at 7 p.m., going to bed, waking up at 1 in the morning, eating dinner, and then going back to bed. It would be hard for us to sleep. Our stomachs would be upset and we would not sleep well. And so that's the same thing that happens to children that don't need night feedings. So we want to work on getting those ounces and those feedings in during the day, separate eating from sleeping, and not feeding in a sleep environment. So the exception to that rule is when you do have a child that is young enough for a night feeding, the sleep environment, it is okay to feed them in the sleep environment for a night feeding. So that's not the bedtime feeding. That's a night feeding. So that happens after they fall asleep. So between bedtime and morning wake up, those are our night feedings. Okay. Also, when they do wake up in the middle of the night, we don't want to rush to them. Now, I understand with our high needs babies, they go from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. I get it. I've been there. But try to experiment with staying out of the room for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes if you can, and then go in there and use your sleep training strategy where you're going to be in the room with them. But the reason we want to wait is because when we do, we establish whether our child is waking up out of habit or out of hunger. And if they are waking up out of habit and we leave them, we give them a chance, even if it's just 3 minutes, they're going to start putting themselves back to sleep within those couple of minutes. And again, if you keep doing that and you keep trying it, you'll be surprised as to how quickly that happens. So the eat sleep association is a huge one. So we want to, just make sure that we are trying our best when it comes to that, and separating eating from sleeping. If we have breastfeeding moms and we have a dad that is, home and able and willing to help, it is great. I call dad the secret weapon when it comes to the beginning of sleep training, because our babies can smell our milk and they will put up more of a fight for us. So if we have a dad that is able, we send them in there, especially that first night or two at bedtime and in the middle of the night. It does not mean that dad needs to do all of it. It just means that let's give him a try and see how much he can handle. And then when he needs to tag out with you, that's perfectly fine. But it is just like a little trick that if that works for your family, go ahead and try that. A couple of myths and wives' tales I like to go over. One of them has to do with eating. So, of course, I get all of the people that say to me, well, my mom or my sister told me to put cereal in my baby's bottle and that way they could sleep, through the night. But that's not working. And the reason it's not working is because our stomachs do not control sleep. Our brain does. So if your child is getting the adequate nutrition that they need, if your child is fed and properly during the day and they're getting those ounces in, there's really no reason that they can't give us really long stretches of night sleep if they're still within the age where night feedings are appropriate. And if we're past the age where night feedings are appropriate, so 9 months and over, there is no reason that they cannot sleep through the night. Okay. So don't listen to that wives' tale, because it's not going to do anything for you. Okay. Another one, like I said earlier, people say, okay, well, just don't let your child nap and that way they'll be exhausted and they'll fall asleep at night. Or I have parents that call me and they say, well, my mom and my grandma said that kids in our family don't nap. And so, my child doesn't nap because it must be hereditary. That's not the case. All children nap. All children need to sleep. And again, night sleep affects day sleep affects night sleep and vice versa. So we need to have a solid plan and a solid schedule for day sleep in order to get those longer stretches at night. So don't think your child doesn't nap. Don't think your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old, your 1-year-old even is phased out of napping. Absolutely not. A child should nap until they go to kindergarten. Even when they're in kindergarten, like with my son, I was napping him on the weekends. So, you want to establish naps when your child is an infant, and that will make toddler life a lot easier. And for all of us with our high needs children, we all know, or we can, I'm sure, anticipate toddler life with a high needs child. If we have sleep established, it is so much easier to deal with toddlers. And if you have an infant and you guys are, toying with the idea of sleep training, I suggest doing it now, because once we get into the toddler stage, not only are we dealing with sleep hormones, now we're dealing with toddler behavior. So it's a double that we have to address. So with infants, we're just dealing with sleep hormones. And so I definitely recommend doing it before we get to the toddler stage. So if anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. I'm just going to go through my list here real quick and make sure that I went over everything that I promised. 2 things that I have written down here, and I was looking at the comments throughout the week when Holly had posted about the webinar. A lot of people were talking about the witching hour. And I remember somebody wrote, my child's witching hour is between 1 and 4 a.m. No. What that means is your child has really low melatonin production, and that's why they're awake. So if you've heard the term, the more they sleep, the more they sleep, it's because a child that takes long naps during the day and has a good bedtime, sleeps through the night, the more they sleep, the more melatonin they have. The less they sleep, the less they sleep. So that means that if they're up all day and not taking naps, or they're not going to bed until 11 o'clock at night, they now have cortisol running through their body. And cortisol is the hormone that keeps us awake. So if you've ever heard of the term, I just got a second wind, that means that your body just produced cortisol. And that's what happens to our children. And so that's how they stay up from 1 to 4 a.m. Because they have cortisol running through their body. The witching hour happens in the evening, usually around 6 to 7. For our colicky babies, it's usually extra brutal. And really what the witching hour is that our circadian rhythm is starting to establish. And so that means that our daytime hormones are fighting with our nighttime hormones. And as we get to that time at night, they're kind of fighting with each other, and it's kind of making the baby, their inner hormones are kind of just going all over the place, and they don't know what to do. And so that's why they scream and they cry, and it seems like a really difficult time period. And then eventually the nighttime hormones win and they take over, and that's when we get night sleep. So that's what witching hour is. And so, just don't confuse that with low melatonin production. And then when it comes to the melatonin and cortisol, like I was saying before, we want to make sure that we have melatonin established. There's no need to take supplements for it or give your children supplements for melatonin. We want to stay away from that. We can absolutely produce natural melatonin through sleep training. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions if we want to transition into that. Oh, great. Okay. Okay, so this question is, my 11-month-old has an 8 p.m. bedtime, but has been waking up around 4 a.m. and will stay awake for 2 hours in her crib and will lie back down to go to sleep. She cruises around and crawls around her crib. How can I encourage her to lie back down and go to sleep? So for an 11-month-old, 8 p.m. is too late. So you need to bring bedtime earlier. and you need to build up that melatonin. So like I said before, between 4 and 6 a.m. is the hardest time of the 24-hour period to build melatonin. So that means that her melatonin is low. So you don't want to take her out of the room. You want to leave her in the dark room and use your sleep training strategy until 6 a.m. So if you need to be in the room with her until 6 a.m., that's fine. Keep her in the dark room until 6. And it also means that your daytime timing is off. So we would need to establish a better nap schedule and an earlier bedtime, and then we'll see that start to go away. And one more thing before I go to the next question is, keep in mind that milestones are very disruptive to sleep. So if your child is starting to crawl, so if they're getting up on all fours and starting to rock back and forth, or starting to move a little bit, or they're full on crawling, that's going to be disruptive to sleep. Same thing with walking. And so we just want to keep that in mind. If things are going really well and then all of a sudden you're seeing these unexplained night wakings, a lot of times it's due to a milestone. Usually if it is a milestone, they are awake at night for about an hour, but they're usually not crying. So that's a way to know that there's a milestone that's being disruptive to sleep. Okay, can you share with us the wake windows for 3 months and 4 months? So they're very, very small. So I would say at 4 months, the largest would be 1.75, which would be an hour and 45 minutes. At 3 months, I would say 1.25 to 1.5 would be the most. And so that just means an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half. So you want to keep those really controlled. At 3 and 4 months, you want a 4 nap schedule at 4 months. You want to start transitioning into a 4 nap schedule at 3 months. But again, 3 months is in our newborn stage. And so we're just working on things. We're not being strict when it comes to naps. When we're in the 4-month zone, we are on a solid 4 nap schedule. And so for 3 months, sometimes we might have 5 naps, and that's fine. But the most important thing is to control those wake periods and really not go more than 1.5. How would you remove a dummy? I feel like I'm replacing it too much during the night. So if your child, so I think that pacifiers in the newborn stage are kind of a lifesaver. So if they are in the newborn stage and you're using one and they're taking to it, continue to do that. Once they get to 4 months and once you start sleep training, we just take it away. We take it away cold turkey. And this will be one of the biggest points of anxiety for parents when I work with them. And it always is so funny because I'll check in with them, after 24 hours. I check in with them throughout the first day, of course, but after 24 hours, I always bring up the question about the pacifier. And they always say, gosh, that was so much easier than I thought it would be. So you just take it away cold turkey. We are moving houses in a couple of months. Is it still worth starting now in our current house? Yes, absolutely. And that is why, I talk about the soothing routine and the sleep environment. As long as in your new house, you set up the sleep environment the same way and you use the same soothing routine, you can move every month if you need to, and it's not going to be disruptive to sleep. So I would not wait. If you want to do it now, go right ahead. And just make sure that the sleep environment is set up properly when you do move. The darkness, the white noise, the temperature, make sure you have that solid soothing routine you're doing every day and every night. And when you move houses, you continue to do the same routine. I have a 7-month-old who has recently been fighting to go to sleep each night. We have had a solid routine for a few months now, and she is in her cot at 6:30 p.m. and falls asleep by 7 at the latest. Recently, she is doing cartwheels in her cot until 8:30 or later and still waking between 5 and 6 a.m. So I'm worried she isn't getting enough sleep. She's becoming irritable and hard to settle in the afternoons. So yeah, I would agree she's not getting enough sleep. So we need 12 hours of solid sleep at that age. And what that tells me is day sleep is off. So we would need to make sure that there's no associations going on. So there's nothing going on that she can't recreate on her own at night. So that's why we don't rock, bounce, or feed to sleep ever, because then they can't do that by themselves. And so, like I was saying before, that the daytime timing is so critical. And so I would just want to see that the whole 24-hour schedule, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a daytime timing issue. But a great bedtime. My babe screams and fights sleep every time and has to be rocked and patted quite firmly, and still fights it by crying and screaming until he finally falls asleep, or sometimes we'll feed to sleep and then wakes roughly 30 minutes later to only do that again. He has never been comforted by me taking to him or gently rocking or patting. I am so worried that I won't be able to settle him without picking him up and doing the exhausting rock. So this is, the just kind of the standard thing that is going on when parents reach out to me. And so that just tells me that we need to try it. We need to try sleep training. They think they need to be rocked or bounced or fed to sleep because that's what they're used to. So, they cry, and that's what we do. We go to them and we resort to our old tricks. And that's what they think happens. They think, that's how I fall asleep. Mom and dad give some sort of intervention, whether it's rocking, bouncing, or feeding, and then I can go back to sleep. So what sleep training does is we teach them that from the beginning of the night. So remember, one of my 3 critical pieces of information, number 3, is your child needs to go from awake to asleep while lying in their crib. So the more that you do that, the more that it's going to work. And so you want to pick a day to begin, have a solid plan in place, and start at bedtime. And once they go from awake to asleep at bedtime, they're going to start doing it by themselves in the middle of the night, and during short naps. And, that's what sleep training is. We just teach them to go to sleep on their own. I'm always worried that my son doesn't get the right amount of sleep for his age. Since birth, it's been rough. Does that affect him? Will sleep training help my son all around after getting the right amount of sleep? Honestly, I'm not just saying this as a professional. I'm saying this as a mom with a high needs child that did not sleep more than 2 hours in a row. I am not exaggerating that, until 9 months, until we sleep trained. And the only reason I didn't sleep train before that is because I didn't know what it was. Had I known what it was, I would have done it right off the bat. I only have 1 child. If I had a second child, I would sleep train the day they turned 4 months. It is absolutely critical to their cognitive development. It is critical to their hyperactivity that will be influenced as a toddler. So if you see toddlers running around and they're just their behavior is pretty, uncontrollable, I'm going to bet a large amount of money that they did not sleep well as an infant. So sleep training will absolutely help that. And it is so helpful for their development, for their temperament, and for your whole family, for you guys to have that time at night, and for you guys you and your husband to be able to sleep through the night. And I've never, ever had a family say to me, I regret sleep training, or why did we do that? The only thing people say is, wow, we should have done that sooner. So absolutely, sleep training will make a world of a difference. And what I will also say about sleep training a high needs child is a lot of times we eliminate a lot of the high needs behavior once we get sleep under our belts. And we see what we're left dealing with is what we're really dealing with. So what I mean by that is if your child is now sleeping well through the night and sleeping independently and taking great naps, if they're having, behaviors and things that are going on that are questionable, that's what we're really dealing with. So we can't contribute that to it being, oh, well, they're overtired or they don't sleep well, so that's why they're acting like that. So once sleep is established, whatever they're still doing is what we need to address. What if they need to eat between 4 and 6 a.m.? Still take them somewhere to feed. You said not to remove them from a dark room at these times. So that's a night feeding. So a couple things about that. Are they still age appropriate for a night feeding? Have they met their night feeding cutoff? So I would need to know how old the child was, and so that would there are specific night feeding cutoffs for the age. So for example, for a 7-month-old, it would be one night feed would be allowed, and it would be after 7 hours. So that's not 7 hours from when they fall asleep. It's 7 hours from their bedtime feed. And so again, the exception to feeding them in their sleep environment is a night feeding. So you can feed them in their sleep environment in the dark room between 4 and 6 a.m. So I suggest sitting in a chair, turning on a small lamp, feeding them, and then putting them back down to sleep. And what I will also say is if your child does not go to sleep immediately after a night feeding, they did not need that feeding, and they're doing that out of habit. What do you recommend working on first, day sleep or night sleep? So one of my critical points that I said in the beginning of this is we have to do all of it at the same time. There is no point in doing any of it unless we're doing all of it. Your child does not know the difference between being expected to sleep independently at night versus daytime. So they don't wake up and say, oh, it's a nap instead of night sleep. So hold on, let me wait for mom and dad to come rock me. Oh, wait, no, this is a nap. I'm supposed to fall asleep on my own now. So let me go ahead and do that. They don't know the difference. So you have to start a sleep training plan at bedtime, and then you do all of it moving forward, all bedtime, all naps, and you do all of it at the same time. I have an 11-month-old who learned to crawl, stand, and now I can't get him to lie down on the cot, and our previous responsive settling techniques don't work anymore. I can never get him in the cot calm. Any tips? So again, when it comes to milestones, those are going to be disruptive to sleep. So if you have everything else in place, you don't have an eat sleep association, your child is falling asleep independently, you have a good bedtime, you have a solid 2-nap schedule at 11 months, you need about 3 hours of day sleep, and you need about 11 to 12 hours of night sleep at that age. If you have all of that going on, then I would say this is just short-lived because it's a milestone. If you don't have all of those other aspects going on, I would say that we need to work on the ones that we don't and establish those, and that will make that go away. Will this be more hard on mamas who close sleep but babies nap during the day in their crib? No, there's no difference to that. Again, your child doesn't know the difference. They just know, okay, hey, I'm being put down in my crib during the day, but at night I co-sleep. It's not harder or easier. It just means that we need to be consistent all across the board. And so we need to say, hey, you're going to sleep in your bed, in your crib, day and night. And so, just eliminating that co-sleeping piece at night is really all you would need to do. Work on the timing, make sure it's independent sleep, and you guys should see a lot of progress. Can you share a sleeping routine for an almost 2-month-old? A sleeping routine, if you mean a soothing routine, I recommend going into the room, reading. At 2 months old, I would do one picture book. I would sing a song, and then I would say a key phrase and then lay them down. Sometimes I have parents do some like cuddling. And so, you can, at 2 months, it's okay to do a soothing routine like on a chair or on a bed, but do the same thing. So it doesn't need to be the same book every time, just the same number of books. So if you always read one book, do one picture book, sing your song, then you can do some cuddling. You can have a change in lighting. So if the main light in the room dims, you can go ahead and dim the light. If it doesn't, you can shut off the main light and put on a small lamp so that they understand that the next step is lights off completely. And so after we have a change in lighting, we can just cuddle with them and talk to them, and spend 3 or 4 minutes just loving on them, and then stand up, kind of swaying back and forth like slow dancing, and sing the song again. and then lay them down and say a key phrase. And so, for example, my son's name is Owen. So for us, it was, it's night, night for Owen. Mommy and daddy love you. You can come up with your own. Just keep it short and sweet and to the point. And that key phrase will be very important, but the song will be the most important piece that they will associate with sleep. So you want it to be the same song every day and every night. Any tips on settling a baby in the cot who relies heavily on being rocked and patted firmly and will scream hysterically if this isn't done, doesn't like gentle cuddles, etc. So they rely heavily on that because that's what they're used to. And so again, this goes back to my one of my most critical pieces of advice, which is they need to go from awake to asleep while in their crib. So you can lean over that crib as far as you need to. You can do some stroking and some patting, some heavy patting, put a little pressure and then release, whatever they find soothing, but just have them in the crib while you're doing it. So like with my son, he was 9 months. We were in the same position where all we ever did was, rock or bounce or feed to sleep. And that first night, I was really leaned over that crib and he could stand. And so he was standing up and I was shushing and I was kissing him and I was stroking his back. And it takes time. Like that first night took about 45 minutes of that, but eventually he kneeled down and then he laid down and then he fell asleep. And so you have to be consistent with it and you have to go in there knowing that, they can sense your anxiety. So if you're going to try for 10 minutes and give up, just don't do it at all. You have to be ready to do this. And so if you have that solid plan in place and you know that you are ready, then you want them to go from awake to asleep. Don't worry about too much touch or too much voice that first night. You do whatever you need them to do to go from awake to asleep while in their crib. And one more question. Do you offer online consultations for people in other countries? Yes, I work with people in other countries all the time. And so I do email consultations and everything I do is virtual. And so, we would just come up with a time to have our consultation. We can do Skype, FaceTime, or just over the phone. I have international calling because I do work with families all over all the time. And then we could communicate through email and text message and whatever works for you. So yes, absolutely. What's the easiest way to get away from nursing, feeding to sleep? Doing it when they wake up. So as soon as they wake up in the morning, we feed. If you are nursing, you want to take your time and get in, a good feeding. So do one breast, then do the next. Even if it takes some time, even if they need like a 5 to 10 minute break in between, and then, we go back at it, get that full feed in as soon as they wake up. If your child is old enough for solids, you want to do milk, solids straight away, and then you go to playtime, then you do a soothing routine, and then you lay them down. What if my pediatrician isn't on board for sleep training? No medical issues, but I don't think they understand high needs and just how awful her sleep is. They said she looks exhausted, but only said to start giving rice cereal and probiotics. So this is where I struggle. I can't supersede the advice of a pediatrician. So if that is what your doctor is saying, then if you were my client, I would say you have to follow it. But to be honest, I would tell you to get a second opinion. If they're telling you that your child looks exhausted, it's because they are. And again, pediatricians are not trained on child sleep unless there's a medical issue that the child doesn't sleep. And so, what they're recommending is because they don't really have answers for you. And so, I would get another opinion at 5 months. If they were born early, and they're not quite out of the newborn stage, then I would agree with them. But if your child was born at 40 weeks or even, at 36 weeks, if they're 5 months, that's fair game to sleep train. And so I would say, it's perfectly fine to do that if you have a doctor that checks off on it. If you're going to keep that doctor and reach out to a sleep consultant, we cannot tell you to do something if your doctor is telling you not to. My 7-month-old co-sleeps, falls asleep right next to me after we read. How do I get her transferred into her own cot when she totally loses it every time I set her in it? So you don't transfer. The point is that you do it from the very beginning, and you have to have all of the elements lined up and in place at the same time. So it's not that we're just going to experiment one night and say, hey, let's try and put her in her crib and see what happens. No, we have to be ready to sleep train and have that solid plan in place. It is so important for our high needs kids to be consistent, to have that plan in place, and to move forward. And so you want to start at bedtime and initially put her in the crib and just not make co-sleep even an option. And so once you're ready, you would start and then you would go through the process of sleep training. Which is better for a 5-month-old, a 1.5 hour long nap in a baby carrier, or a 35-minute nap in a crib? Which is better for a 5-month-old? Okay. So the longer nap is better, but in a baby carrier, that is assisted napping, and that is motion sleep. So it's not as restorative. So that's kind of a hard question for me. I mean, if that's going to be every nap, if that's the choice for every single nap, I would say the crib for 35 minutes. If it's once in a while and you need to choose, I would say, on occasion it's fine to do it in the carrier or in a stroller or in a car, but we want the child napping in the crib, falling asleep on their own, even if it's just for 35 minutes. Once we use crib hour, like I was talking about before, we'll be able to extend those naps and get them to transition from one sleep cycle to the next. How long does it take? How long does it take to sleep train? So, I mean, that depends on the child. I can't give you an exact time frame because I don't want to promise something that I can't necessarily deliver. But what I can tell you is if you are consistent, you will see night sleep come together in just a couple of nights. It will be shocking as to how quickly night sleep comes together. If I only dealt with night sleep, my program would be 4 or 5 days long. Naps are what take the majority of the 2 weeks. So my program is generally 2 weeks. And so, that is the naps, the day sleep are what takes longer. Again, if you are consistent and you don't feed to sleep and you follow all of the other things that we talked about, you will see night sleep established in just a handful of nights. I have a 2-month-old that won't sleep anywhere but on me or next to me. How can I change this? I know it isn't safe. So you want to control those wake times. So you want it to be between 45 minutes and an hour each time you attempt to put them to sleep and attempt to lay them down in their crib. Each time, do some shushing, do some patting, some heavy touch. Try it for about 5 to 10 minutes. If it's not working, then pick them up and rock them or bounce them. Try to refrain from feeding them to sleep each time, and then try to lay them down. So 2 months is still the newborn stage. So that's why I'm giving this advice. So just remember that. But just attempt to do it each and every time you lay them down for naps and for nighttime. And the best thing you can do is control those wake periods. Where could I find information on how long a baby at a certain age naps and sleeps? So, I mean, I guess each consultant might have a different answer for you. So it would just depend on maybe who you worked with and what their system is. There are books out there, there are blogs, there's stuff on the internet, but just remember those are written for the broader audience. So you have to remember, was your child born at 40 weeks? Were they born a little bit earlier? Because we do have to adjust for age. And then we have to see what, how old they are and what you guys have been doing to know how we're going to establish that sleep. And so just, general information for day sleep and night sleep can be found, on the internet. But if you reach out to a consultant, what we do is we customize it. So I'll be able to tell you your child is exactly this old, according to when they were born. And then this is how much day sleep they need. this is when, this is how we're going to do it, and the same for bedtime and night sleep. Okay, I think this will be the last question. Do you recommend not sleeping in the nursery during sleep training? Like if they wake up a lot in the first few days, do not sleep in the nursery during sleep training. No, we want to be in our own room and let them have their own room. If they wake up a lot, then you go in there and you use your sleep training method. But we do not want them to get used to you being in the room because it's kind of pointless. So we want to make sure that we have a strategy that we're comfortable with. So like I was talking about before, I can have you in the room while we're sleep training, but while they're asleep, you absolutely do not need to be in the room now.
Okay, thank you so much, Diana. I think we actually got to most of the questions. Sorry, hold on, it got dark here. There we go, okay. Yeah, I think we got to most of the questions. But if we missed your question, or obviously if you would like to sleep train, or you just want to have a quick chat with Diana to see if sleep training is right for you. She does offer free 15-minute consults. Is that right, Diana? You still do that?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I have linked to her website, Big Sky Lullaby, at the top of this post, so you can reach out to her there, or I'm assuming in the group as well, Diana, because you are a member of the group as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she has generously offered anybody who books with her in the next week gets a 10% discount. So just make sure that you mention that you were here on the live, and she'll make sure that you get that discount. So I think everybody can see why Diana is my go-to person when it comes to sleep and hygiene babies. And thank you so much. So many awesome tips. And I know this was so helpful for our members. And I just wanted to just give away one more prize. This is another one of those portable white noise machines. And that is going to go to Chelsea Grace Morley. So Chelsea, just make sure that you reach out to me after this live is done. Just send me a private message and I'll make sure you get that. So thanks again, Diana. Thank you, everybody who joined us tonight. And I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.